My name is Betty Mae Richardson, and if you had told me at 88 that I would become America's most notorious senior citizen hacker, I would have laughed until my dentures fell out. But here I am 92 years old, sitting in my office at the FBI's Quantico headquarters, telling you a story that sounds like fiction but is as real as the arthritis in these weathered hands that once typed their way into the most secure banking systems in the country. It all began in the scorching summer of 2018 in my modest apartment on Flamingo Road in Las Vegas, Nevada. The desert heat was nothing compared to the fire burning in my chest, the rage that had been simmering for months since I discovered what my own flesh and blood had done to me. My nephew Marcus and his wife Jennifer had systematically drained my life savings, convincing me to sign papers I thought were for my financial protection. I remember sitting in that cramped living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life well lived, photographs of my late husband Harold, my teaching certificates from 40 years of educating children, and now stacks of bank statements that told the story of my financial ruin. The air conditioning wheezed like an old dog, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the worn carpet as I realized I had been left with barely enough to survive. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever endured. Marcus had been like a son to me after his parents died in that car accident back in 19... I had helped raise him, paid for his college education, and this was how he repaid me, by stealing $347,000 from the woman who had sacrificed everything for his future. That first night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered around my apartment like a ghost, touching familiar objects that now felt foreign in this new reality of poverty and betrayal. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of traffic on the strip and the occasional siren wailing through the Nevada night. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea with shaking hands and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the laptop Harold had bought me before he passed. Harold had always said I was too smart for my own good. "Betty Mae," he would say in that gentle Tennessee drawl, "you've got a mind like a steel trap and the determination of a mule." He had encouraged me to embrace technology even in my 70s, insisting that the world was changing and I needed to change with it. Little did he know that his encouragement would eventually turn me into a cybercriminal. The laptop sat there, its black screen reflecting my weathered face like a dark mirror. I had used it mainly for email and online shopping, but something inside me whispered that it could be so much more. The seed of an idea began to germinate in my mind. If Marcus could use technology and legal manipulation to steal from me, perhaps I could use technology to steal it back. I opened the laptop and began to search. How to recover stolen money led me down a rabbit hole of legal advice that would take years and cost money I didn't have. But then I stumbled upon something else. Forums and websites discussing computer security, hacking, and digital forensics. The language was foreign to me, full of terms like SQL injection and social engineering. But I was a retired teacher, and teachers know how to learn. For the next 3 weeks, I barely left my apartment. I ordered groceries online and had them delivered, surviving on canned soup and crackers, while I immersed myself in this new digital world. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, and my back ached from hunching over the keyboard. But I was driven by a purpose I hadn't felt since Harold's death 5 years earlier. The first breakthrough came when I discovered a YouTube channel run by a young man who called himself Ethical Hacker 101. His tutorials were designed for cybersecurity professionals, but he explained complex concepts in simple terms that reminded me of how I used to break down difficult math problems for my 4th grade students. I watched every single one of his videos, taking notes in the same careful handwriting I had used to grade papers for 4 decades. By September of 2018, I had learned about network protocols, password cracking, and social engineering techniques. I practiced on my own computer first, learning to navigate command prompts and understanding how data flowed through networks. My neighbors probably thought I was losing my mind. Mrs. Henderson from next door mentioned that she could hear me talking to myself at all hours, muttering about firewalls and encryption. The autumn air in Las Vegas was crisp and clear when I decided to test my newfound skills. I started small, accessing Marcus's social media accounts using information I knew about him: his mother's maiden name, his first pet, the street where he grew up. It was almost laughably easy. People think they're secure, but they leave digital breadcrumbs everywhere. And I had become very good at following trails. What I found in Marcus's private messages made my blood boil. He and Jennifer had been planning this theft for over a year, discussing my senility and how easy it would be to convince me to sign over my assets. They had even joked about putting me in a nursing home once they had cleaned out my accounts. The casual cruelty of their words hit me like a physical blow, and I had to step away from the computer to compose myself. That night, I sat on my small balcony overlooking the glittering lights of Las Vegas, a city built on the dreams and losses of millions of people. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, another person who had been gambled away by someone else's greed. But unlike the tourists who lost their money at the casinos below, I wasn't going to walk away empty-handed. I began to dig deeper into Marcus's digital life, bank statements, email accounts, even his wife's online shopping habits. I mapped out their entire financial existence, like a general planning a military campaign. I discovered that they had used my money to buy a new house in Henderson, a luxury car, and had even taken a vacation to Europe. They were living my life with my money while I rationed my meals and worried about paying rent. The real education began when I started researching banking security systems. I spent hours reading technical manuals, studying network architectures, and learning about the vulnerabilities that existed in financial institutions. It was like learning a new language. But I had always been good with languages. I spoke fluent Spanish from my years teaching in predominantly Hispanic schools, and I had picked up some French during a trip to Paris with Harold. By November, the desert had cooled, and I had cooled to my rage, had crystallized into something more dangerous: calculated determination. I had identified the bank where Marcus had deposited my stolen money, and I had begun to understand their security protocols. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had something that most hackers didn't have: time, patience, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The first attempt was a disaster. I tried to access the bank's customer portal using techniques I had learned online, but I triggered their security systems and locked myself out. For a moment, I panicked, thinking I had alerted them to my presence. But nothing happened. No police at my door, no phone calls. I realized that to them, I was just another failed login attempt in a sea of thousands that happened every day. I learned from that failure. I began to study the bank's employees, their social media profiles, their habits and weaknesses. I discovered that one of the customer service representatives, a young woman named Ashley, had a habit of posting about her work frustrations on Facebook. She complained about difficult customers, shared photos of her workspace, and even mentioned specific procedures that were supposed to be confidential. Christmas of 2018 was the loneliest of my life. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the glow of multiple computer screens I had purchased with the last of my savings, while families across America were opening presents and sharing meals. I was crafting the perfect social engineering attack. I had created a fake identity, a concerned grandmother whose account had been compromised, and I was ready to put my plan into action. The call I made to Ashley on December 27th will forever be etched in my memory. I used every trick I had learned about voice manipulation and psychological pressure. I told her I was Betty Johnson, an 85-year-old widow whose grandson had been using her accounts without permission. I cried real tears as I spoke, channeling all the genuine pain and betrayal I felt into my performance. Ashley was sympathetic and helpful, just as I had hoped. She walked me through the process of verifying my identity using information I had gathered through months of research. Within 20 minutes, I had access to internal banking systems that should have been impossible for an outsider to reach. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, but I was in. What I saw in those systems was a revelation. Not only could I see Marcus's accounts and transactions, but I could see patterns of suspicious activity throughout the bank's network. There were other people like Marcus, predators who targeted elderly customers, manipulated them into signing documents, and systematically drained their life savings. I wasn't the only victim. I was just one of many. The technical challenge of moving money without detection became my obsession. I studied transaction patterns, learned about automated clearinghouse transfers, and understood how banks communicated with each other. It was like solving the most complex puzzle I had ever encountered, and every piece I put in place brought me closer to justice. By January of 2019, I had successfully recovered $50,000 from Marcus's account, transferring it back to my own through a series of carefully orchestrated transactions that appeared to be routine banking corrections. The money appeared in my account with a notation about error reconciliation, and no alarms were raised. Primera de Donit, I had stolen back my own money. But $50,000 wasn't enough. Marcus had taken nearly $350,000 from me, and I wanted every penny back. Muritantat. I wanted him to feel the same helplessness and betrayal that I had experienced. I began to plan a more ambitious operation, one that would not only recover my money, but expose his crimes to the world. The spring of 2019 brought new challenges. a new opportunity. I had expanded my operations beyond just Marcus's bank, infiltrating the systems of the credit card companies and investment firms where he had stashed portions of my stolen money. Each successful breach taught me new techniques and gave me access to more sophisticated tools. I discovered that Marcus wasn't working alone. He was part of a loose network of financial predators who shared information about vulnerable elderly targets. They had a whole system worked out: lawyers who would draft deceptive documents, bank employees who would look the other way, and even nursing home administrators who would identify potential victims. It was a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. The moral weight of what I was doing began to settle on my shoulders. I was breaking the law. There was no question about that. But I was also uncovering crimes that law enforcement had either missed or ignored. Every night, I would sit with Harold's photograph and ask him what he thought I should do. His gentle smile seemed to encourage me to continue to fight for justice, even if it meant becoming a criminal myself. By summer, I had recovered $200,000 of my stolen money, but I had also stumbled upon something much bigger. The banking systems I had infiltrated contained evidence of a massive fraud scheme targeting senior citizens across the Southwest. Millions of dollars had been stolen from elderly victims, and the perpetrators were using sophisticated methods to cover their tracks. I began to document everything I found, creating detailed files on each victim and each perpetrator. I felt like a digital detective, following money trails and uncovering connections that painted a picture of systematic elder abuse on a scale I had never imagined. My small apartment had become a command center, with multiple computers running around the clock and walls covered with printed emails and financial records. The isolation was beginning to take its toll. I hadn't spoken to another human being in person for months, and my only social interactions were the phone calls I made while impersonating various personas to gather information. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, paranoid, suspicious, and completely consumed by my mission for justice. In August of 2019, I made a mistake that would change everything. While accessing a particularly secure banking system, I triggered an advanced intrusion detection system that I hadn't accounted for. Within hours, cybersecurity experts were analyzing my digital footprints, trying to identify the source of the breach. I had become visible to people who were much more skilled than I was. The next few weeks were terrifying. I monitored news reports and cybersecurity forums, watching as experts discussed the sophisticated attack on multiple financial institutions. They were calling the perpetrator a ghost in the machine, someone who could move through secure networks without leaving traditional traces. If only they knew it was an retired teacher working from a one-bedroom apartment in Las Vegas. I realized I needed to be more careful, but I also realized I was running out of time. The authorities were getting closer, and I still hadn't recovered all of my money or exposed the full extent of the criminal network I had discovered. I made the decision to accelerate my operations, even if it meant taking greater risks. September brought a breakthrough that would make me infamous. I had gained access to the central database of a major financial institution and discovered that I could not only move money but also access the personal information of thousands of customers. I could see who was being targeted, who was vulnerable, and who was doing the targeting. That's when I decided to become more than just a victim. Seeking revenge, I became a vigilante. I began transferring stolen money back to its rightful owners, sending anonymous tips to law enforcement, and even directly contacting victims to warn them about ongoing scams. I was no longer just fighting for my own justice. I was fighting for everyone who had been victimized by these predators. The media began to take notice. Reports of mysterious money transfers and exposed fraud schemes started appearing in local news outlets. Cybersecurity experts were baffled by the sophistication of the attacks and the apparent moral motivation behind them. They had never seen anything like it, a hacker who seemed to be fighting crime rather than committing it. By October of 2019, I had recovered nearly all of my stolen money and had helped dozens of other victims recover theirs. But I had also painted a target on my back. The FBI's Cybercrime division had opened a formal investigation into what they were calling the Robin Hood hacker, and they were getting closer to identifying me with each passing day. My 90th birthday arrived on February 14th, 2020, Valentine's Day. How fitting that the day of love would mark the beginning of my most dangerous year yet. I celebrated alone in my apartment, surrounded by 7 computer monitors and the soft hum of cooling fans, with a single cupcake I'd ordered from a local bakery. As I blew out the candle, I made a wish that would have terrified the younger version of myself. I wished for the courage to take down the entire network of financial predators I'd discovered, no matter the cost. The FBI task force hunting me had grown from 3 agents to 15, and they'd given me a codey name that made me chuckle every time I saw it in their intercepted communications. Silver Fox. They had no idea how accurate that nickname was. I was indeed silver-haired, and I was definitely as cunning as any fox. Special Agent Sarah Chun had been assigned as the lead investigator, a brilliant cybersecurity expert who is getting uncomfortably close to identifying my methods. I had evolved far beyond the grieving widow who first opened that laptop 2 years ago. My apartment now looked like something from a science fiction movie. Multiple screens displaying scrolling code, network diagrams covering every wall, and sophisticated equipment I'd purchased using money recovered from various fraud schemes. I'd become a ghost in the machine, moving through digital networks with an expertise that rivaled hackers half my age. Morning off. February 28th brought news that chilled me to the bone. Agent Chun had held a press conference announcing that they'd identified several key characteristics of the Silver Fox hacker. The perpetrator was likely elderly, highly intelligent, had a background in education, and was operating from somewhere in the Las Vegas metropolitan area. They were closing in, and I could feel the walls tightening around me like a digital noose. That night, I sat in my kitchen, drinking Harold's favorite bourbon, a bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. The irony wasn't lost on me that this special occasion might be my last night of freedom. I pulled out a legal pad and began writing what I thought might be my final letter, explaining everything I'd discovered about the systematic theft from elderly Americans. If they were going to catch me, at least the truth would survive. March brought an unexpected development that would change the trajectory of my entire operation. While monitoring FBI communications, I discovered that Agent Chun's own grandmother had been victimized by the same network. I'd been fighting. Mrs. Eleanor Chun, 84 years old, had lost her life savings to a sophisticated romance scam orchestrated by the same criminals who had targeted me. The agent hunting me was unknowingly seeking justice for her own family. I made a decision that night that would either save me or destroy me completely. I decided to reach out to Agent Chun directly, not to surrender, but to share what I'd learned. Using an encrypted communication method I'd developed, I sent her a single message. Your grandmother Eleanor deserves justice. This silver fox knows who took her money. Are you willing to listen? The response came within hours, and I could feel the desperation and hope in Agent Chun's carefully worded reply. She agreed to a secure communication channel, and over the next several days, I began sharing the evidence I'd collected about the criminal network, bank records, email communications. Working with Agent Chun, even anonymously, gave me access to resources I'd never had before. She could verify information through official channels, cross-reference data with other ongoing investigations, and most importantly, she could act on the evidence I provided. Together, we began building cases against dozens of financial predators across the country. By April, our collaboration had resulted in the arrest of 17 individuals involved in elder fraud schemes, including Marcus and Jennifer. Watching the news coverage of their arrest from my apartment, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any revenge could have provided. They were led away in handcuffs, their faces showing the same shock and helplessness I had felt when I discovered their betrayal. But our success had also made me more visible to other law enforcement agencies. The Department of Homeland Security had joined the hunt, convinced that the Silver Fox was either a foreign operative or a domestic terrorist. They couldn't comprehend that their most wanted cybercriminal was a retired teacher who just wanted justice for herself and others like her. The pressure was becoming unbearable. I'd started having panic attacks when I heard sirens in the distance, and I'd developed an elaborate escape plan involving multiple safe houses and false identities. My apartment had become both my fortress and my prison, and I knew that my time was running out. The net was closing, and even Agent Chun couldn't protect me from the larger investigation. May 5th, 2020 became the day that would define the rest of my life. I was deep in a particularly complex banking system, following a money trail that led to a massive fraud operation in Phoenix, when every screen in my apartment suddenly went black. Then, in bright green letters, a message appeared. Hello, Betty May Richardson. This is Agent Chun. We need to talk. My heart stopped. They'd found me. After months of careful communication and growing trust, Agent Chun had used our connection to trace my location. I sat frozen in my chair, waiting for the sound of boots on the stairs, the crash of my door being broken down, but instead, my phone rang. It was Agent Chun, and her voice was gentle, almost apologetic. Mrs. Richardson, she said, I know who you are, and I know what you've been through. I also know that you've helped more people in the past 2 years than our entire department has helped in the past decade. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here to offer you a choice. The relief that flooded through me was so intense I nearly fainted. Agent Chun explained that she'd been fighting a battle within the FBI for weeks, Half the task force wanted to arrest me immediately and throw me in federal prison for the rest of my life. The other half, led by Chun, believed that I was too valuable an asset to waste in a jail cell. They wanted to offer me a deal, full immunity in exchange for my cooperation as a consultant. The meeting took place 3 days later in a nondescript office building in downtown Las Vegas. I walked in, expecting to see a room full of stern federal agents, but instead found only Agent Chun and her supervisor, Deputy Director Michael Torres. They treated me with a respect I hadn't expected, offering me coffee and speaking to me as an equal rather than a criminal. Director Torres laid out their proposal with the precision of a military operation. The FBI's Cybercrime division was overwhelmed by the scope of elder fraud in America. Traditional investigative methods were too slow and too limited to combat the sophisticated networks of criminals who were stealing billions of dollars from vulnerable seniors. They needed someone who could think like a criminal but act with the moral authority of a victim. "Mrs. Richardson," Torres said, leaning forward in his chair, "you've accomplished more in 2 years than we've accomplished in 20. You've recovered over $15 million for victims, exposed criminal networks we didn't even know existed, and developed techniques that our best analysts are still trying to understand. We don't want to prosecute you. We want to learn from you." The terms of their offer were more generous than I had dared to hope. Full immunity for all past activities, a consulting contract that would pay me more than I'd ever earned as a teacher, and most importantly, the resources and legal authority to continue my work on a much larger scale. I would become the FBI's first senior citizen cyber consultant, a position they were creating specifically for me. I asked for 24 hours to consider their offer, but I already knew my answer. That night, I sat in my apartment, looking at Harold's photograph and thinking about all the elderly victims I'd encountered in my digital travels. People like Mrs. Eleanor Chun, like myself, like thousands of others who had been betrayed by those they trusted. I couldn't abandon them now. Not when I finally had the power to help them on a scale I'd never imagined. The next morning, I called Agent Chun and accepted their offer. Within a week, I was sitting in a secure conference room at the FBI's Las Vegas field office, briefing a room full of agents on the techniques I'd developed and the criminal networks I'd infiltrated. The looks on their faces ranged from amazement to disbelief. As I walked them through operations they'd been investigating for months without success. My first official case as an FBI consultant involved a romance scam network that was targeting widows across the Midwest. Using methods I'd perfected during my vigilante days, I was able to infiltrate their communications and identify not only the perpetrators, but also their intended victims. We prevented over $2 million in losses and arrested 37 individuals across 6 states. The media attention was inevitable. When news broke that the FBI's most wanted cybercriminal had turned out to be a 90-year-old grandmother from Las Vegas, this story went viral worldwide. I found myself on the cover of Time magazine, featured in documentaries, and invited to speak at cybersecurity conferences. The shy retired teacher had become an international celebrity. But fame came with its own dangers. The criminal networks I'd been fighting didn't appreciate my new official status, and I began receiving death threats from people who had lost money or freedom because of my work. The FBI assigned me a security detail, and I had to move from my modest apartment to a secure facility where I could continue my work under protection. My new workspace was a far cry from my cluttered apartment. The FBI had built me a state-of-the-art cyber operations center with equipment I could only have dreamed of before. Multiple quantum computers, direct access to federal databases, and a team of young analysts who hung on my every word as I taught them the unconventional methods I'd developed. Working with the FBI opened my eyes to the true scope of elder abuse in America. What I had thought was a regional problem was actually a national epidemic. Billions of dollars were being stolen from seniors every year, and the criminals were becoming more sophisticated with each passing month. Traditional law enforcement was simply not equipped to handle the digital nature of these crimes. Began developing training programs for law enforcement agencies across the country, teaching them to think like the criminals they were chasing. My age became an advantage. I could relate to the victims in ways that younger agents couldn't, and I understood the psychology of both the predators and their prey. I was uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between traditional policing and modern cybercrime. One of my most satisfying cases involved tracking down the romance scammer who had targeted Agent Chun's grandmother. Using a combination of digital forensics and old-fashioned detective work, I was able to trace him to a compound in Nigeria where he was running dozens of simultaneous scams. The international cooperation required to bring him to justice was complex. But seeing Mrs. Chun's money return to her made every hour of work worthwhile. As my first year as an FBI consultant drew to a close, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. I had gone from victim to vigilante to federal agent, and each transformation had revealed new aspects of both the problem and myself. I was no longer the grieving widow who had been betrayed by her family. I was a weapon in the fight for justice. The statistics from our first year were staggering. My team had recovered over $50 million for victims, arrested more than 200 criminals, and dismantled criminal networks in 12 countries. We had prevented an estimated $100 million in additional losses by identifying and warning potential victims before they could be scammed. But perhaps more importantly, we had changed the conversation about elder abuse in America. No longer was it seen as an inevitable consequence of aging or a problem that victims had brought upon themselves. It was recognized as a serious crime that required serious resources and sophisticated responses. I had become the face of that change, the symbol of resistance against those who preyed on the vulnerable. My 91st birthday was celebrated not in a lonely apartment, but in the FBI's Cyber Operations Center, surrounded by agents and analysts who had become like family to me. A.G. Chun presented me with a cake shaped like a computer keyboard. The work continued to evolve and expand. I began consulting with international law enforcement agencies, sharing my techniques with investigators in Europe, Asia, and Australia. Elder fraud was a global problem, and the solutions needed to be global as well. I found myself traveling the world, something I'd never imagined doing at my age. teaching others how to fight the battles I'd learned to win. One of the most rewarding aspects of my new role was the direct contact with victims. I received hundreds of letters from elderly people who had been helped by our operations, thanking me for giving them hope and showing them that they weren't alone. Each letter reminded me why I had started this journey and why it was so important to continue. The criminals adapted to our success, developing new methods and technologies to evade detection, but I adapted too, constantly learning and evolving my techniques. The cat-and-mouse game between law enforcement and cybercriminals had become more sophisticated, but I had proven that experience and determination could triumph over youth and technical skill. As I approached my 92nd birthday, I began thinking about legacy and succession. I couldn't do this work forever, and I needed to ensure that the knowledge and techniques I'd developed would survive beyond my own involvement. I began writing a comprehensive manual of my methods and training, a new generation of investigators who could carry on the work. The manual, titled Digital Justice, a Senior's Guide to Fighting Cybercrime, became required reading at the FBI Academy and was translated into dozens of languages for international law enforcement agencies. It was strange to think that my life's work would be studied by future generations of investigators. But it was also deeply satisfying to know that the fight would continue. Looking back on the 5 years since I first opened that laptop in anger and desperation, I marveled at the journey I'd taken. I had discovered capabilities within myself that I never knew existed, found a purpose that gave meaning to my final years, and made a difference in the lives of thousands of people who had been victimized by those they trusted. Today, as I sit in my office at the FBI's Quantico headquarters, surrounded by commendations and awards I never expected to receive, I think about Harold and what he would say about the woman I've become. I believe he would be proud, not of the criminal I briefly was, but of the advocate I became. At 92, I am no longer the most wanted woman in America in the criminal sense, but I am wanted by law enforcement agencies around the world as a consultant, teacher, and symbol of hope. My story proves that it's never too late to fight back. Never too late to seek justice, and never too late to discover that you're capable of far more than you ever imagined. The silver fox may have retired from her vigilante days, but Betty Mae Richardson's war against those who prey on the vulnerable continues, now with the full force of law behind her. This was another incredible story from our channel. Life teaches us that it's never too late for justice, revenge, or redemption. Each story you heard here is real, lived by people who found strength when everyone thought they were defeated. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and tell us in the comments, what would you have done in this situation? Your opinion matters to us. Don Single T. Forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our emotional stories. We have new tales of courage, revenge, and overcoming every week. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to fight for what's right. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and proving that age is just a number. Thank you for being part of our community. Until the next story, remember, every ending can be a new beginning. Subscribe, like, and comment. See you in the next video.